Welcome to Forecasting Impact, a podcast brought to you by the International Institute of Forecasters. This show brings together experts from academia and industry to discuss a wide range of subjects on forecasting science and practice in business, society, economy, healthcare, and education. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with us today.
I'm Laila Akhlaghi, one of your hosts today, and joining me for this conversation is my co-host, Mariana.
Hi, thank you.
We're joined today by Alex McCullough, who is a researcher working at the intersection of prediction markets and probabilistic forecasting and the crypto ecosystem. He is best known for his work analyzing the accuracy of Polymarkets, where he has built widely referenced dashboards to evaluate market calibration and performance. Through his analysis, Alex helps bring rigor and transparency to the discussion around how prediction markets perform as forecasting tools. I've been really fascinated by Polymarkets. Alex, I'm looking forward to this conversation. So to start off, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what first got you interested in prediction markets and in forecasting?
Yeah, totally. Thank you guys for having me on. I love talking about prediction markets, so I was super happy to get your email. So my background, I have been in crypto since 2016. I don't know how familiar you guys are with crypto in general, but I basically got started right after something called the DAO hack. And I mean, at that point, prediction markets was actually one of the topics that would, at that point, people were talking about them already. They were like kind of at that point, they were totally theory. They were like sort of a pie in the sky idea about what crypto could be used for, what blockchains could be used for. But there weren't really any being used in practice. But essentially, I mean, that's when I kind of got started, or that's when I started thinking about prediction markets. And I was already at that point, like really interested in this question of, would this actually be accurate in practice? But it was kind of just something that was in my mind. I never thought about it too much. And then in 2024, when Polymarket started getting a lot of attention and started getting a lot of use, I was like, I happened to at that time also be doing my own blockchain analytics, just kind of to brush up my skills using SQL and Dune. And so it kind of all came together, and I was like, oh, this is a really interesting question that I actually could evaluate now, and it's something that I haven't seen anyone else do. So I looked for the information online and I couldn't find it. So I mean, I'm the kind of person who, like, if I'm doing something, I kind of only want to do it if I'm like the first one to do it. So I was getting really bored with like the other types of blockchain analysis that I was doing, and so I decided to measure Polymarket and see if I could use on-chain data to measure it, accuracy. That's kind of how, a little bit about my background. That's kind of how this kind of came about.
And that is not your full-time job, right?
No, that's correct. So I work actually for Awaken Tax. We are, it's crypto tax company. So if you trade on Polymarket or you make any other kinds of on-chain trades or activities, we can help you file your taxes.
That's very interesting, Alex. But let's take a step back. And for listeners who may be new to this space, can you explain us what is a prediction market and how does a platform like Polymarket work?
Yeah, absolutely. So prediction markets, I mean, they kind of have two sides. There's one side is essentially pretty similar to a normal betting market. You go in and you bet on, let's say, the Super Bowl. You bet on who you think is going to win. But the way that it's structured is there's two central parts. One is it's peer-to-peer. So it's not me going to a casino and betting against the casino. It's me going to a market, and then, you, Laila, or you, Mariana, going to the market as well. And I want to make a bet and you want to make a bet. And Polymarket connects us and we bet against each other. So it's more peer-to-peer. I mean, obviously there are market makers that come in, and there are more, maybe like professionals, but essentially it's kind of leveling the playing fields. And then, so that's one side. And then the other side is that it's using this data. It's basically amalgamating all of these bets to show us predictions, like about what is going to happen in the future. So right now, I mean, you can look at, again, the Super Bowl. Most people are expecting Seattle to win. And so if you want to bet on Seattle, the market is showing a 66% chance Seattle wins. So if you bet 66 cents, you can win $1. But if you bet 33 cents on the Patriots, you can win the same dollars. That's where the odds come from. So like if I want to make a bet with Mariana, I have to put up 33 cents. She has to put up 66 or 67 cents. And then whoever wins gets the $1. So that's kind of how they come about making predictions.
So one of the core ideas that you're talking about is that people have to put real money at stake.
Mm-hmm.
And in simple terms,
yes.
Why does this seem to produce better forecasts than a survey or a panel or expert opinions alone?
Yeah, this is really the crux of the whole point of prediction markets. It's the idea that if you have, skin in the game, if you have to actually put something up that you stand to lose, that's going to tell the public or tell whoever what you truly believe rather than what you might say you believe. And it's also, it's also going to incentivize people to really think carefully. Ideally, think carefully about their bets. And it's going to incentivize them to do more research and only make a bet when they actually think they're going to be correct. Take the other side of that. This comes at a time when trust in institutions has deteriorated. I think a lot of that is a little bit overhyped, but that's the case. And like people who are on the news, people who are, traditionally seen as experts could in theory say things that they don't necessarily believe, or they could have other incentives we don't know about to make predictions. So a prediction market is kind of a way of uncovering the truth through wisdom of the crowd rather than just relying on single people who could be either corrupt or misincentivized in some way.
Now that you mentioned the wisdom of the crowd, prediction markets are often described as a form or wisdom of the crowd. And from a forecasting perspective, can you explain in more detail what makes the aggregation of beliefs so powerful?
I kind of want to give like a really almost like more like almost spiritual, not spirit, like conceptual answer of like, it's more like fascinating to me that like this is kind of uncovering something that like we as a species or we as a society, a collective civilization of individuals might actually have better information when we come together and find out the average of what we all believe could often be more accurate or more important than what any single one person believes, or at least what most single people believe. Honestly, it's fascinating to me that it works. That's a question for someone higher than my pay grade. I don't know.
Question.
Yes. It's about human nature and like the way we communicate and organize ourselves. And it's that type of stuff is fascinating to me, but I wish I could give you an exact answer.
You have mentioned before in the past that prediction markets attract people who believe they have an edge. So what kind of information or advantages do the participants bring to these markets?
Yeah, so there's definitely multiple ways that you can get an edge. I think the most pertinent one to talk about and the one that's people talk about most frequently is definitely insiders, and that's definitely a thing. Like we can see in the data, there's lots of situations where, like, I don't know what you want to call it, invasion of Venezuela, when the U.S. took Maduro, there was just a few hours before that happened, brand new wallets were funded and placed bets on Polymarket that was going to happen for, I think, like $30,000, and they made $400,000. Significant enough activity that this wasn't just a random person. We can't say for sure that was an insider, but definitely has all of the markings of an insider. So, it's probably the case that was either someone who had inside information based on access to the U.S. military, or it could have been a Venezuelan. We don't know. So that's one type of thing, and like that's one way that people can gain an edge, obviously. And insider trading in the stock market is obviously very illegal and condemned. I will say that in prediction markets, it's a little bit less clear whether that's such a terrible thing. I think there's ways that it could be. Certain forms of insider trading are probably not wanted. Other forms, like it might not necessarily be the worst thing. Another way, like a more legitimate way of getting edge is through all sorts of like data analysis. I've heard stories before about hedge funds using things like satellite imagery to trade the stock market to determine if Walmart parking lots or maybe any retail store parking lot is, more or less crowded than normal, and then giving them an edge before quarterly earnings reports to know whether to trade a specific stock. So that, I mean, that's not based on prediction markets, but that can be extrapolated to prediction markets. And I think, one interesting thing now is like on prediction markets, you don't even need to really be, a hedge fund or an expert. I can tell you in my personal case, like even just like I'm a pretty big sports fan, and I watch a couple years ago, I was watching literally every single NBA game that I could, well, every single Celtics game. I'm from Boston, and I was just familiar enough with specifically the Celtics to like be watching a game and understanding like, okay, maybe they're down by 15, but they're playing well. And like, I think that they have a better chance to win this game than the market is indicating. I mean, I'm just playing with peanuts, but like, I found that I was able to like do pretty well betting those markets where I just happen to have sort of an area, not of expertise exactly, but more familiarity than most people. There was a market for who's going to have the most rebounds, or no, defensive player of the year. And there's a player, Draymond Green, he was like heavily favored in this market, but his stats were not backing that up. And Evan Mobley, who eventually won, had like really long odds to win defensive player of the year. And I couldn't figure it out. And I was kind of scared to bet on it because I thought, somebody knows something I don't. But then I realized Draymond Green was going on his podcast, like basically campaigning for himself to win defensive player of the year, which I thought there's no way anybody's going to take this into account. I bet on that market and Evan Mobley won. And I mean, if you're paying attention, prediction markets are still small enough today where you can gain an edge just by kind of paying attention and looking at where there might be inefficiencies or where the market is incorrect.
That's cool. And actually, that brings us to the next question, and why I came across your name was because you've created dashboards that evaluate how accurate Polymarkets are. So how should we think about accuracy in prediction markets? Because going back to the Venezuela situation, I think there was some controversy. Was it an invasion or not? And so do you pay out or not? And how do you define that? So I think that gets a little bit further out from this question about accuracy. What is the right question to ask? How do you determine then what is accurate or not? And I have a follow-up. What kind of predictions tend to be more accurate?
This is a great question. And I have found that like, as I have worked on this, the question has evolved in my mind significantly. Like basically every time I've made a dashboard, I have like realized, okay, this is good and interesting, but it could be better by doing this. And then that's kind of the focus for my next dashboard. So for the first dashboard was just this pure, if a market is above 50%, I'm considering that Polymarket to be predicting that this event will occur. It's very simple, very basic. Yes, no, did it happen? Did it not? Was it right? Was it wrong? If that was a terrible score, like 30%, then you would know that Polymarket was terribly inaccurate, right? So, I mean, the fact that it's at 95% is a good thing, but it's not the end all be all, and it's not actually really telling us what we need. Like what we really want to measure is not whether yes or no a market was accurate. We want to measure how accurate the predicted odds were. So let's say we take all the markets on Polymarket that have been at 60% odds historically. Ideally, they should be correct, or they should be occurring 60% of the time. Essentially, what you want is that you want to dial into that number. And so there's part of that first dashboard. It's called a linear regression model. I don't call it that on the dashboard, but that's what it is. It shows you all the markets kind of grouped into 5% chunks. And it shows you what the average percentage or what the average prediction was for that chunk, and also how often that chunk resolves that event occurred. That market that dashboard is incredibly accurate, almost all the way through. The 0 to 5%, I believe, had an average prediction of 2%. So 2% of these events were expected to occur, and actually, I think that one nailed it, like exactly 2% of those markets actually occurred. There is some discrepancy, especially around the middle. The closer you get to 50-50, the harder markets tend to be to predict. So that's really the question that you want to answer. And then so for the second part of the question, which markets are better or worse, or maybe giving us the most accurate information, it's really not about the type of market. It's really more about like how much liquidity is in the market. So on the Briar score dashboard that I did, there's a section, I think it's on the lower half of it, that shows the Briar score based on total volume traded in a market. And that is really significantly more accurate. There is more trading activity. So essentially that's really what you want to look for. There may actually also be specific genres of markets that are more accurate, but I haven't like dug deeply enough into it yet to really answer that question.
Alex, as a follow-up to what you just said, for listeners without a strong technical background, can you explain us what a Brier score is and why is it a proper scoring metric?
Yes, absolutely. I will try to do this as simply as possible. The Brier score is basically taking each individual market, and basically when you measure everything all together, it kind of can give us a picture of Polymarket as a whole. So basically every market is a binary outcome. Either it happens and that's a 1, or it doesn't happen and that's a 0. So let's take, for example, if that market is at like 50-50 odds and it does happen, that's 0.5. So you take the event outcome, which is a 1, you subtract the 0.5, which was the prediction, and you're left with 0.5. And then you square that number and you get 0.25. That's the Brier score for that individual market. Let's like take the other side of that. If the market did not happen, it would be 0 minus 0.5, which is negative 0.5. And this is why you square it, so that it also equals 0.25. A 50-50 market will always be a Brier score of 0.25, no matter what happens. But then when you take, let's say, like a 90% market, if a market is predicted at 90% and it resolves and correctly, it was correct, then 1 minus 0.9 is 0.1, squared is 0.01. So that's like an extremely good Brier score. You want the lower the number, the better. Firstly, if a 90% market is incorrect, 0 minus 0.9 is negative 0.9. Square that, and the result is 0.81, which is a terrible Brier score. A stronger prediction can lead to better scores, but also it gets penalized more for being wrong, rather than like the 50-50 is just always going to be 0.25. So that's basically how Brier scores works. It's really about measuring the overall predictive capacity of a specific model.
Yeah, and that is one of the key metrics your dashboards show. And Polymarket has a very good Brier score. I think last time I checked it was 0.06. And I think in sports markets it's a little bit higher, like maybe 0.18 or 0.2. So yeah.
Yes, I think it was 0.1899 last I looked at it. Yeah.
So Alex, now that we have talked about how to evaluate prediction markets, let's talk about the conditions under which they break down. And liquidity, that you already mentioned, comes a lot in your work. Can you tell us why liquidity matters so much for forecasting accuracy, and what happens when markets are too thin or susceptible to manipulation?
Yeah. Well, so I think the general like way to think about it is like more money being bet on a market is more information. It's more people's opinions. It's more weighting. It's easy for one person to be wrong. It's less likely for tons and tons of people to be wrong. Not that it's impossible. It obviously happens, but more liquidity generally tends to mean like more people have confidence, and more people with skin in the game, more total skin in the game, just generally amplifies the accuracy of a specific market. And you also, if you log into Polymarket and if you like browse around, you'll eventually come across markets that have very little liquidity because there's just so many markets there. And you'll see very odd things, like it'll predict a market has an 80% chance to occur and also an 80% chance not to occur. And when that happens, I mean, obviously something is wrong. That type of thing can happen when there's not very much liquidity. That being said, you don't necessarily need like a ton of liquidity to be accurate, but you do need some minimal amount, like probably anything less than, I would imagine, maybe $1,000 of total liquidity is probably not necessarily the best information.
I can see gamblers or people who have strong preferences for underdogs, or there might be some kinds of systematic biases that you've probably observed. And I'm just wondering how much they've affected, outside of the liquidity, how much have those things affected the forecast quality?
I mean, I definitely think that's a factor. I mean, that's historically been observed in betting markets, not just with prediction markets. People like betting on underdogs. People like betting on things that they want to happen rather than things that they necessarily think will happen. So all of that is definitely factored in. I mean, at the end of the day, the people who do have an edge are getting an edge because there are other people who don't have good information, who are betting, who just because they want to bet. When you study data like the data that's on Polymarket now, I mean, it's kind of the beauty of the system and also kind of a drawback. Like, we don't have specific information about the people who are trading these markets because it's just random addresses. So you can't really, I mean, you can't smoking gun say that like there's underdog bias here, but the data does tend to, I mean, suggest that there probably is some of that happening. And just the fact that it's been observed in betting markets in the past. So yeah, extrapolating the exact reasons about where bias comes from is pretty difficult. It's more like an assumption that you can guess is accurate.
Alex, your data also shows that many markets are extremely long odds events. And why is this such an important caveat when interpreting a prediction market's performance?
Yeah, I mean, so this is definitely very important to keep in mind when you look at these accuracy numbers that are on my dashboards. They appear to be like, I mean, they make Polymarket look like it's a crystal ball almost. And Polymarket is performing very well, like no question. I think for a young startup, I am extremely impressed with the information that comes out of Polymarket. But it's definitely, when you look at the overall Briar score of Polymarket, and it's like 0.06, 0.05. I mean, that puts it in a league with like the best prediction engines in the world. I mean, you guys actually probably are maybe more familiar with that than I am. But that's a great Briar score. You have to consider the fact that there's lots of markets on Polymarket that are kind of obvious, that it's almost more of a joke that they're on there. Like, there's a market for will Jesus return in 2026. I think we can all pretty safely put a lot of money on that market if we want to. I think the best way to think about this is when you take a market like that, or let's say there's thousands of markets like that, and you look at the Briar score, do we really care if Polymarket is predicting that accurately? Like, in my opinion, no. At least you can't put Polymarket up against, let's say, a traditional poll, which is answering like who's going to win an election. You can't group those predictions in and compare them against each other. If you want to really dig into Polymarket's accuracy and like value as a predictive engine, you have to compare it against other prediction engines that are predicting the same things or the same types of things. And that is definitely an area that I need to explore more. Started to dig into it. I updated the Briar score dashboard maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, which you may have seen. You mentioned it, the head-to-head sports Briar score of 0.1899. So like that's obviously a much more normal Briar score. That's not 0.06. But when you compare that Briar score to traditional betting markets at casinos, those scores tend to be more in the 0.2, 0.22 range. The one that I measured, the measurement I took was just purely NFL games back to 2015, and the Briar score was where I have it right here. It's like 0.213, I think. So it's not this eye-popping like 0.06 score, but it does show that Polymarket is performing better than these legacy counterparts that you can compare it to. Definitely more work is needed there. if someone out there wants to also jump in and start doing this, I would greatly appreciate that. I have a lot on my plate. It would be great to see like data against pollsters. I think that's the next logical thing to measure.
Okay. And that would be interesting to see. So would you have any recommendations for an organization using prediction markets for informing real decisions or best practices so that they're not misunderstanding or using it inappropriately or having overconfidence on it? Is there a recommendation there?
So there's a lot of. Have you heard of futarchy at all?
I haven't.
Okay, so this is kind of getting ahead of the game. I mean, there are. I mean, if you want to use Polymarket to inform certain activities that you have today, I mean, you certainly can. Like, I mean, I think Polymarket is already right now useful as a tool to just go in, just log on to Polymarket. You don't have to make any bets. It's useful as a tool, just as a source of like, what the world thinks is going to happen. And some of those markets are more interesting than others. That's for sure. I'm sure that, you know, a lot of financial analysts are using this information already. I mean, we saw Polymarket get a significant investment from the New York Stock Exchange. So this information is very much already being embedded in the financial world. This idea of futarchy, which I mentioned, is kind of that's something that we have yet to see play out. But the idea would be creating markets that would essentially, you know, do things like inform the board of directors about maybe the overall direction that a company wants to take. For example, you could imagine a prediction market or something similar to a prediction market where you have a market that says like, should we replace the CEO with this person, essentially, with a new person. And then when people bet on that market, instead of betting, I mean, it'd be slightly adjacent to prediction markets where you're saying, like a user is saying, if the CEO is fired and replaced with this other person, I will buy shares in the company for this much money. And like it's locked in. So the board of directors could see like through this similar sort of wisdom of the crowd concept. If we do this, you know, this is a good financial decision. It will make our stock price go up to this number, or it's a bad decision. We need to keep the CEO, you know, that type of thing. That's a very like rudimentary description. There's probably a lot of people who could describe that in a more in-depth way than I can, but I mean, that would be a really interesting development if we saw that type of predictive capacity of like, you know, take off and be actually used for decision making.
To round up this section, how do you see prediction markets fitting alongside more traditional forecasting approaches like statistical, machine learning, or neural models?
I am not the neural model or machine learning expert, so I've got to start there. We've already seen, you know, Polymarket is referenced in the news all the time. It's really hit like a level of adoption that's really impressive so quickly. And I think we're just going to continue to see more of that. I think you're going to continue to see, like, you know, in the bottom of your screen, you know, a ticker that shows you there's a 63% chance so-and-so will win an election, or Apple's stock price will tank next, you know, that type of thing. I think that is the most maybe important or most interesting element of the next maybe year or two in prediction markets is just going to be more. There are going to be more and more in our minds. There are going to be more and more in our parents, our grandparents, like everyone's minds, not just people who are like into this stuff. It's going to keep creeping into like everyone's lives. Already tons of people know about it, but that's just going to continue. And I think primarily like the next step is really further entrenchment in the financial world. Wall Street they're the ones who understand how to leverage this data better than anyone. They're going to be at the forefront of like pushing it forward and using it, and then it will probably leak out from there in ways that it's hard to really predict right now.
And Alex, maybe more on a personal level, what's one lesson about forecasting that took you the longest to learn, or that you have learned by working with prediction markets?
I mean, I've definitely learned that my original ideas about like what accuracy in prediction markets meant were totally based. I mean, it's where it's really all about predictive odds rather than predicting yes or no events. Like that, I mean, I guess that was the biggest thing for me, is just when you dive into the data, you really start to see it differently and like understand things differently. I'm super fascinated with these markets, and I'm really impressed with how accurate they are. One of the other biggest things I've learned is like people see that dashboard like 95% accuracy, and that is the end of their investigation. Like they do not search farther than that. They see what they like. They're all about it. So, I mean, it's kind of revealing in human nature to that way, because I have written on that dashboard, like these caveats that you guys found. Most people breeze right past that. They don't care at all. So that's an interesting insight into human nature, I suppose. That might be my number one. Like I really, I tried to like kind of explain and explore the data. And then also come out with that second dashboard. And people do find that and find it interesting and useful. But mostly, I think people a lot of times have confirmation bias, and they like Polymarket, and they like that they see how accurate it is, and they stop exploring at that point. I don't know. Take that for what you will. It probably means there's more edge in these markets that you can have if you know what you're looking for or know what you're talking about.
I think that's an important conclusion, especially one that our audience will identify this probabilistic view instead of yes or no. Is it accurate? Yes or no?
I appreciate the opportunity to like speak about these things, especially the, diving into like, I love this data. I love that that it's gotten so much attention, but I also like am really happy to like kind of at least get the message out to someone that like there are caveats to this data.
Thanks for coming on today to Forecasting Impact and sharing with us the work that you've been doing with our audience. And thank you, Mariana, for joining me today as well. Continue to visit us at Forecasting Impact Podcast.
Thank you for taking your time and listening to Forecasting Impact. If you liked this show, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. We appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next episode.